Nothing in life can defeat you if you understand that value isn't given, it's strategically built and ruthlessly protected. Most people don't stay powerless because they lack talent or potential. They stay powerless because they never learned that value is a game with specific rules, and those who don't know the rules get exploited by those who do. In this video, I'll reveal Machiavelli's dark lessons on building unshakable value and controlling every situation you enter so you can stop being used and start being chosen, stop being replaced and start being irreplaceable. Now, imagine this. Someone works incredibly hard, gives everything they have to their relationships, their career, their friendships. They're always available, always helpful, always putting others first. Yet somehow, they're the first person forgotten, the first option discarded, the one people turn to only when no one better is around. Late at night, they wonder, why doesn't anyone value what I bring? Here's the truth. They destroyed their own value by making it too available and too cheap. While they focused on being nice and accommodating, others focused on being scarce and strategic. By the end of this video, you'll understand the hidden mechanics that separate high-value people who control their circumstances from low-value people who get controlled by them. You'll see why certain individuals are constantly chosen, respected, and pursued while others remain invisible and replaceable. And you'll learn the cold, calculated principles that have made Machiavelli's teachings essential reading for anyone who refuses to be powerless. Before we start, type this in the comments to lock it in: I build my value and I control the game. Most people never become high value, not because they're incapable or unworthy, but because they operate under a devastating illusion that value is something you're born with, something automatic, something people should just recognize without you doing anything strategic to create it. From childhood, we're taught the comforting lie. Be yourself. Be authentic. Be available. Be giving. And somehow, magically, people will see your worth and treat you accordingly. That your intentions matter more than your positioning. That your character automatically translates to respect. That being good to people guarantees they'll be good to you. But examine the evidence around you. The people who make themselves endlessly available, who say yes to everything, who sacrifice their boundaries to help anyone who asks. Where are they in the hierarchy of respect? At the bottom. Taken for granted. Called upon only when convenient. Discarded the moment someone more interesting appears. Still believing that if they just give more, sacrifice more, prove themselves more, eventually people will value them. Machiavelli saw what most refuse to accept. Value isn't inherent. It's perceived. And perception is controlled by positioning, scarcity, and strategic behavior. When you're always available, you signal that your time has no competing demands, which means it has no value. When you give without boundaries, you train people that your resources are infinite and free, which means they're worthless. When you chase approval, you announce that others' validation matters more than your own standards, which means you have no standards. This is why good people with endless generosity often command zero respect. The system isn't unfair. It simply operates on supply and demand, on perceived scarcity, on strategic positioning. Not on how good your heart is. Smart people understand these forces and construct their value deliberately. The naive hope their goodness will be discovered. The strategic make sure their value is undeniable and scarce. Machiavelli's lessons aren't about being fake or cruel. They're about being intelligent with the most valuable asset you have. Yourself. He revealed that if you expect people to value you just because you exist, just because you're helpful, just because you mean well, you will be used, discarded, and forgotten. Your boss doesn't owe you appreciation. Your friends don't owe you loyalty. The market doesn't owe you recognition. The moment you accept that value must be built, positioned, and protected, you stop begging for respect and start commanding it. That's when nothing can defeat you because you finally understand that you're playing a game where value determines everything. Number 1. Create scarcity through selective availability. Most people destroy their value by being constantly accessible. They respond immediately to every message, accept every invitation, make themselves available whenever anyone needs anything. They think this makes them valuable. It makes them disposable. Machiavelli understood that what is abundant cannot be precious. When you're always there, always responsive, always ready to drop everything, you send a clear signal that nothing else in your life is more important than whoever is currently demanding your attention. Your colleague messages you at midnight and you respond within minutes, every single time. You're training them that your boundaries don't exist, that your time has no competing priorities, that you have nothing valuable filling your schedule. Now watch how they treat you compared to the person who sometimes takes hours to respond, who occasionally says, "I'm unavailable right now." That person gets respected. You get taken for granted. This isn't about playing games or being rude. It's about understanding that perceived scarcity creates perceived value. When people have to wait for you, when they have to work around your schedule, when they discover you're not always available, your presence becomes something worth having instead of something freely abundant. Machiavelli observed that the more easily something is obtained, the less it is esteemed. If you give yourself away constantly, you communicate that you're not in demand, which means you're not valuable. Look at who commands respect around you. The mentor whose time must be scheduled weeks in advance. The consultant who's selective about which clients they accept. The friend who's warm and caring but clearly has a full life that doesn't revolve around being accessible 24/7. They're not lucky. They've structured scarcity. The naive are constantly available, hoping this proves their dedication, then wonder why people treat them as backup options. The isolated withdraw completely and become irrelevant because nobody can access them at all. Powerful people calibrate availability. They are present when they choose to be, absent when they choose to be. They create windows of access, not permanent open doors. They make their time something that must be earned, not something freely given to anyone who demands it. When you build scarcity, several things happen simultaneously. People start planning around your schedule instead of expecting you to plan around theirs. Your presence becomes an event instead of a given. Your attention becomes valuable because it's not guaranteed. Your time becomes respected because it's clearly allocated to important things. That strategic unavailability makes you impossible to take for granted because you're no longer operating as if everyone else's needs matter more than your own priorities. Drop this affirmation in the comments: my availability is limited and my presence is earned. Number 2. Never show desperation. In the architecture of value, nothing destroys your position faster than desperation. Most people leak desperation constantly without realizing it. They follow up too quickly. They explain too much. They offer too many concessions. They make it obvious they need the outcome more than the other person does. Machiavelli knew that the moment someone senses you need them more than they need you, you've lost all leverage. Desperation is blood in the water. It invites exploitation. You're in a negotiation and you keep checking back, lowering your price, adding extra benefits, making it painfully clear you need this deal to close. The other party now knows exactly what they're working with. Someone with no other options. Someone who'll take whatever they're offered. Your desperation just destroyed your value. Compare that to someone who presents their offer once, then goes silent. Who seems perfectly comfortable walking away. Who communicates through their behavior that this opportunity matters to them, but they're not dying without it. This isn't about being cold. It's about understanding that perceived options create perceived value. When people think you have alternatives, when they believe you'll be fine without them, when they sense you're evaluating whether they're worth your time, your value skyrockets. Machiavelli taught that those who appear most in need are most easily manipulated and most quickly discarded. The one begging for the job, the relationship, the friendship, the deal. They're announcing they're desperate, which means they're low value, which means they'll accept poor treatment. Watch the patterns. Who gets pursued? The person who seems unattached to outcomes. Who gets used? The person who makes their need obvious. Who commands respect? The person who seems genuinely fine either way. The desperate chase harder when someone pulls away, proving they have no options and no standards. The detached completely withdraw and miss genuine opportunities because they can't show any interest. Powerful people remain interested without being desperate. They communicate value for something while simultaneously communicating they'll survive perfectly well without it. They want things but don't need them. They prefer certain outcomes but aren't destroyed by alternatives. When you eliminate visible desperation, you force others to work for your interest instead of assuming they already have it. You make them wonder if they're valuable enough to keep your attention. You shift the dynamic from you proving your worth to them proving theirs. That non-desperate energy makes you very difficult to exploit because people can't leverage your need against you. Drop this affirmation in the comments: I am interested but never desperate. Number 3. Build multiple options relentlessly. Most people become powerless because they put all their value in one basket. One job. One relationship. One friend group. One income source. One path. Then they become completely controllable by whoever owns that basket. Machiavelli understood that those with options have power, and those without options have none. Your value isn't determined by how good you are at one thing. It's determined by how many viable alternatives you possess. Your colleague has worked at one company for a decade, built no external network, developed no transferable skills, saved no money. When management changes and starts treating people poorly, they're stuck. They complain but can't leave. They're prisoners of their own lack of options. You, however, spent those years building skills that work anywhere, networking across industries, developing side income, creating mobility. When treatment declines, you have choices. You're not trapped. You're evaluating. This isn't about being disloyal or uncommitted. It's about understanding that commitment without options is just dependence. When you have no alternatives, you can't negotiate. You can't set boundaries. You can't walk away from mistreatment. You take whatever you're given because you have nowhere else to go. Machiavelli observed that fortune destroys those who have no alternatives when conditions change. But those with multiple paths can pivot when one route fails. Options are armor against unpredictability. Look at who stays powerless. The person is romantically obsessed with one individual who treats them poorly, but they have no other prospects, so they accept it. The professional whose entire identity is tied to one employer who exploits that dependence. The business owner with one client who dictates every term. The negligent build nothing and get trapped by circumstances. The scattered chase everything and master nothing, leaving them with illusions of options but no real capability. Powerful people systematically build genuine alternatives. They develop skills that transfer across contexts. They nurture relationships in multiple circles. They create income from multiple sources. They position themselves so that losing any one thing doesn't destroy them. When you have real options, your entire negotiating position transforms. You can set standards because you're not terrified of loss. You can walk away from disrespect because you have somewhere to walk to. You can demand better treatment because your value isn't trapped in one place. That optionality makes you nearly impossible to control because nobody owns your only path forward. Drop this affirmation in the comments: I build options so I'm never trapped. Number 4. Master the power of withdrawal. In the game of value, most people think the path to importance is constant presence, constant effort, constant pursuit. They're wrong. Sometimes the most powerful move is strategic absence. Machiavelli knew that absence can create more value than presence ever could. When you remove yourself from situations where you're being taken for granted, people suddenly remember what they're missing. You're always the one initiating plans, always reaching out first, always making the effort to maintain the connection. One day you stop. Not with anger or drama. You just quietly redirect your energy elsewhere. Watch what happens. The people who barely noticed you when you were constantly available suddenly notice your absence. They start reaching out. They start wondering. They start putting in effort because for the first time, they're uncertain about your continued presence. This isn't manipulation. It's recalibration. When your presence is constant and guaranteed, it has no contrast, which means it has no perceived value. When you withdraw, you create space for people to feel your absence, which reminds them of your value. Machiavelli taught that the one who cannot walk away cannot negotiate. When people know you'll always be there, always come back, always accept whatever treatment they offer, they have no incentive to treat you well. Your guaranteed presence gives them complete control. Notice who commands respect. The leader who sometimes becomes unreachable, making their time precious. The friend who doesn't chase when the friendship becomes one-sided, creating balance through absence. The professional who turns down opportunities that don't meet their standards, demonstrating they're selective. The needy never withdraw, terrified that absence means abandonment, so they stay in situations where they're undervalued. The cold withdraw permanently at the first disappointment, destroying relationships that could have been repaired. Powerful people withdraw strategically. They remove attention from what isn't working. They redirect energy toward what deserves it. They create temporary absence that forces recalibration. They demonstrate through behavior that their presence is a choice, not a guarantee. When you master withdrawal, you transform dynamics without words. You make people compete for your return instead of assuming your permanence. You create urgency around treating you well because your presence is no longer assured. That strategic absence makes you impossible to take for granted because people learn that undervaluing you means losing access to you. Drop this affirmation in the comments: my absence is as powerful as my presence. Number 5. Invest in skills that compound. Most people stay low value because they invest their time in things that don't accumulate. They're busy, exhausted, working constantly. But they're working on things that leave them exactly where they started the moment they stop. No compound growth. No increasing leverage. Machiavelli understood that sustainable power requires building assets that grow over time, not just trading hours for immediate survival. Your value must compound or you'll stay trapped forever trading time for money. Your coworker spends every evening watching entertainment, scrolling feeds, consuming content that disappears the moment it's finished. 10 years later, they have the exact same skills, the same value, the same options. You spent those evenings learning, building, creating, connecting. 10 years later, your skills have compounded. Your network has compounded. Your options have multiplied. You're not just 10 years older. You're exponentially more valuable. This isn't about grinding mindlessly. It's about understanding which activities create permanent increases in your capability and which ones just fill time. When you build compounding skills, every hour invested makes the next hour more valuable. When you build consumable entertainment, every hour leaves you exactly where you started. Machiavelli observed that the one who builds only for today will suffer tomorrow. But those who sacrifice immediate comfort for accumulating capability eventually become untouchable. Watch who actually becomes valuable over time. The person who learned to communicate, sell, code, design, lead, not just perform their current job. The person who built systems and assets, not just completed tasks. The person who invested in skills that work across multiple contexts, not just narrow specializations. The short-term thinkers optimize for immediate comfort and wonder why their value never increases. The scattered learn superficially about everything and master nothing, creating the illusion of growth without the substance. Powerful people identify high-leverage skills and deliberately compound them. They focus on what transfers, what accumulates, what makes tomorrow easier than today. They build speaking ability, negotiation ability, financial literacy, technical skills, relationship skills, anything that increases their capacity permanently. When you invest in compounding skills, your value curve stops being linear and starts being exponential. Each year you don't just add value, you multiply it. You stop being trapped in time for money exchanges and start operating from accumulated capability. That compounded value makes you impossible to keep down because every year you become more capable, more valuable, more difficult to replace. Drop this affirmation in the comments: I invest in skills that multiply my value over time. Number 6. Control access to yourself. In the hierarchy of value, most people make themselves too accessible to too many people. They think openness and availability signal generosity and warmth. It signals that they're not selective, which means they're not valuable. Machiavelli knew that what everyone can access easily, nobody values highly. When you make yourself available to anyone who wants your time, your energy, your attention, you announce that you have no filter, no standards, no discrimination about who deserves access to you. You respond to every request, attend every event you're invited to, make time for anyone who asks. You're proud of how giving you are. Meanwhile, notice who people actually respect and pursue. The mentor who only takes on a few students. The advisor who screens who they work with. The friend who's wonderful when present but selective about who gets their time. They're not being snobs. They're being strategic about their most limited resource. This isn't about being exclusive for appearance's sake. It's about recognizing that your time, attention, and energy are finite, and when you give them freely to everyone, you signal they are not valuable. Machiavelli taught that the prince who tries to please everyone pleases no one and gets destroyed. When you have no filter for who accesses you, you attract everyone, including people who drain you, use you, and give nothing back. The high-value person creates layers of access. Look at the patterns. Who gets their calls returned immediately? The person calling someone who's desperate for connection. Who has to schedule weeks in advance? The person calling someone who's clearly in demand. Who commands respect? The person who makes you demonstrate value before they invest their full attention. The people pleasers give access to anyone, hoping this makes them loved, then wonder why they're surrounded by takers and users. The isolated wall themselves off completely and become irrelevant because nobody can reach them at all. Powerful people create intelligent filters. They're generous with people who've demonstrated reciprocity. They're warm with people who respect boundaries. They're accessible to those who've earned access. They have circles of proximity based on demonstrated value and mutual benefit. When you control access strategically, you stop wasting energy on people who don't deserve it and concentrate resources on relationships that multiply your value. You become someone whose time must be earned, not assumed. That selective access makes you impossible to exploit because people learn that reaching you requires demonstrating they're worth your investment. Drop this affirmation in the comments: access to me is earned, not given freely. Number 7. Make others compete for your attention. Most people destroy their value by making it obvious they're not in demand. They're always available when someone reaches out. They have infinite time for anyone who shows interest. They never create any sense that choosing them means competing for limited access. Machiavelli understood that perceived competition for a resource dramatically increases its perceived value. When people think they're competing with others for your time, your attention, your partnership, you become more valuable. When they think they're your only option, you become disposable. You're interviewing for a position and you make it clear you're only talking to them. You need this job. You'll wait as long as it takes for their decision. You've just eliminated all leverage. Compare that to subtly communicating that you're exploring several strong options, that timing matters, that multiple opportunities are developing simultaneously. Same candidate, same skills, completely different negotiating position. This isn't about lying or pretending. It's about positioning. When you've actually built options, when you genuinely have multiple opportunities in development, when your time is legitimately in demand, you naturally create competitive dynamics. People sense they need to move decisively or lose access to you. Machiavelli observed that what is desired by many is valued highly. What is desired by none is worthless. The perception of competition triggers urgency, respect, and better treatment. Watch what happens in dating, in business, in hiring. The person everyone wants becomes more wanted because of that universal desire. The person nobody pursues becomes less attractive precisely because of that lack of pursuit. It's not always fair, but it's reliably true. The needy make it obvious nobody else wants them, destroying any leverage they might have had. They manipulate fake competition and get caught lying, destroying their credibility. Powerful people actually build genuine demand by being valuable to multiple people simultaneously. They develop skills multiple employers need. They create relationships multiple people value. They position themselves where genuine competition for their participation naturally emerges. When others must compete for your attention, everything shifts. They demonstrate value to you instead of you demonstrating value to them. They move quickly instead of making you wait. They offer better terms because they're aware you have alternatives. That competitive positioning makes you very difficult to undervalue because everyone knows they're not your only option. Drop this affirmation in the comments: people compete for my attention because I'm genuinely in demand. Number 8. Position yourself as the prize. In the final dark lesson on value, Machiavelli reveals that those who chase power never obtain it, while those who embody value have power chase them. Most people spend their entire lives pursuing, convincing, proving, chasing whatever they want. They fundamentally misunderstood the game. Machiavelli knew that the frame determines the outcome. When you're the pursuer, you're low value. When you're pursued, you're of high value. The question isn't whether you're talented or capable. The question is whether you've positioned yourself as someone who must be won or someone who's grateful to be chosen. You're in a salary negotiation and you're explaining why you deserve the number you've requested, listing your credentials, justifying your worth. You've framed yourself as someone seeking approval for your value. Now imagine someone who states their rate, explains the value they bring, and then goes silent. No justification. No convincing. Just clarity about their standards and willingness to walk if those standards aren't met. Same value, opposite frames. One is begging. One is selecting. This isn't about arrogance. It's about understanding that whoever is chasing is communicating lower value than whoever is being chased. When you make someone work to win your commitment, your participation, your partnership, you're announcing that you're the prize. When you're working to win theirs, you're announcing they're the prize. Machiavelli taught that you're either the buyer or the product being sold. You're either evaluating or being evaluated. The frame you establish determines which role you occupy. Look at who actually controls their circumstances. The employer who interviews as if they're being selective about who they let join their team, not just grateful anyone applied. The consultant who behaves as if they're choosing which clients deserve their expertise, not pitching why they should be hired. The person who dates as if they're evaluating compatibility, not hoping to be chosen. They've established the frame where they're the prize being pursued, not the pursuer hoping for acceptance. The desperate chase and hope to catch someone, anyone, making themselves the low-value participant who should feel grateful if chosen. the arrogant demand to be pursued without actually being valuable, and get rejected because the frame doesn't match the substance. Powerful people become genuinely valuable first, then position themselves as the one doing the selecting. They build skills, options, and standards. Then they operate from a frame where others must demonstrate they meet those standards. They don't beg for opportunities. They evaluate whether opportunities meet their requirements. When you position yourself as the prize, everything inverts. You stop trying to convince people of your value and start letting your value be obvious through how you carry yourself. You stop pursuing and start choosing among those who pursue you. That prize positioning makes you nearly impossible to exploit because you've fundamentally shifted who's evaluating whom. Drop this affirmation in the comments: I am the prize, and I choose who earns me. Now you know Machiavelli's dark lessons on value and control. How scarcity through selective availability makes your presence precious instead of taken for granted. How eliminating desperation gives you leverage in every negotiation. How building multiple options protects you from ever being trapped. How strategic withdrawal forces others to value your presence by experiencing your absence. How investing in compounding skills multiplies your value exponentially over time. How controlling access to yourself filters out users and attracts genuine relationships. How creating competition for your attention transforms how others treat you. And how positioning yourself as the prize fundamentally changes who's pursuing whom. But none of this matters if it just stays as an interesting theory you nod along to and never implement. The question isn't whether these principles work; they've determined social hierarchies, business outcomes, and relationship dynamics for centuries. The question is whether you'll stay low value and controlled, or become high value and in control. Will you keep being constantly available or finally create scarcity that makes your presence valuable? Will you keep showing desperation or develop the options and abundance that eliminate neediness? Will you keep depending entirely on one path or build multiple alternatives that give you negotiating power? Will you keep staying where you're undervalued or master withdrawal that forces recalibration? Will you keep wasting time on consumption or invest in skills that compound your value permanently? Will you keep giving access freely to everyone or create filters that protect your energy for those who deserve it? Will you keep being the only option for yourself or position yourself where others compete for your attention? And will you keep chasing and pursuing? Or finally build enough value to become the prize others pursue? Nothing can defeat you once you understand that value is built strategically, positioned carefully, and protected ruthlessly. If this opens your mind to how value and control actually work, hit the like button. Subscribe for more content on dark psychology and strategic positioning. And share this video with someone who needs to stop being exploited and start being valued. Your transformation doesn't start when you understand these lessons. It starts when you build them. Drop this final affirmation in the comments: I am high value, in demand, and in complete control.